This session is on early Christian art and traditional Christian architecture. If you happen to have your textbook handy, I'd like you to go to page 27 in your textbook. If you don't have your textbook, you can hit pause and run and go get it, or just look at the screen. That'll probably be okay, although it's kind of nice to have something in your hand. Figure 5.3 on page 27, you have this photograph, a photograph of a wall painting in one of the catacombs. Catacombs are... that word catacomb is just a generic word for a series of tunnels underneath the urban areas of Rome. These tunnels are used for all kinds of things, for storage areas for food, for passageways between buildings, for cemeteries. It sounds kind of gross, but to stack up the bodies underneath the ground instead of using up real estate above the ground. Some of these tunnels just simply storm sewers. But they also served as a place to meet for Christians when Christianity was illegal, especially during times of persecution. Although, as I mentioned in class, meeting in houses was much more common. I've got some other photographs of catacombs here. Here you see another section of catacombs. The electric light above, obviously a later addition. Another view of some catacombs. Anyway, here we have a depiction of the first Eucharist service. Jesus sharing the Last Supper, Jesus sharing the bread and wine with the disciples here. If we back out from this photograph, we see that the bottom part of the painting is fallen off the wall, broken off the wall somehow. So we have, let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 disciples here. So we assume there's an 11th one down here, 12th one over here, and then food and bread and wine here. As we look at the depiction of Jesus here, he's bigger than the other disciples, bigger than the disciples. He's in the middle because he's more important. Also in your textbook you have on page 27, figure 5.4. You have a depiction of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. This is figure 5.4 on page 27. The depiction of Jesus as a shepherd is common in early Christian art. At one point in his teachings, he's called himself the Good Shepherd who gives his life for the sheep. And of course, when he said that, the people listening to him said he was crazy, because of course shepherds don't give their life for the sheep. The whole point of having sheep is that sheep give their lives for their shepherd. They give wool while they're alive, and they give their own bodies as meat. I mentioned in class that Jesus gets a lot of attention as he goes around, and for a lot of different reasons. And one reason is that he says things that struck his listeners as being very strange, to talk about the shepherd giving his life for the sheep. But it's a very common depiction. I've got another wall painting here. No, I'm sorry, this is another view of the sculpture that you have a photograph of a copy of in your textbook. Here we have another wall painting depicting Jesus as the Good Shepherd. Some other sculptures. And where's my cursor? There we go. And this kind of interesting epigraph from you have in your textbook, figure 5.5, page 27, again depicting Jesus as a Good Shepherd. Any of these depictions you look at, you see some differences between what we see here and what's become our traditional image of Jesus in Western culture. Because here you see depictions of Jesus from of showing him in the fashion of the time, the Roman fashion of the world. The fashion of the Roman world about the year 300. The costuming is different than we've come to expect. The hairstyle is different, again reflecting the fashion of the Roman world about the year 300. We have a beardless appearance. Again, that's reflecting the fashion of the Roman world when these paintings or sculptures were made about the year 300. And a more youthful appearance than we've come to expect. Most pictures of Jesus you see today, he looks like an old guy, but Jesus is only in his early 30s at the time of the crucifixion, not yet in the prime of life. So there are some differences in the depiction of Jesus. One kind of side note to pay attention to during the course is how the depiction of Jesus changes over time in Western culture until it kind of settles in to a traditional image about the time of the Renaissance, about the 1500s. On page 30 in your textbook, you have a model of this building, Old St. Peter's Basilica. That word basilica is an Italian word that means a church. Old St. Peter's in Rome is called Old St. Peter's Basilica because it's long since been torn down and replaced by New St. Peter's Basilica, even though New St. Peter's Basilica is about 500 years old. It's still called New St. Peter's Basilica. But here you have Old St. Peter's Basilica. After the legalization of Christianity, very quickly, we start to see buildings built in the Roman world specifically for Christian worship, so that rather than being scattered out all over the cities, meeting in homes, the Christians would have a common place to meet to worship. This is one of the first buildings intentionally built for Christian worship. It's only built about 20 years after the legalization of Christianity. You have a model of this building on page 30 in your textbook, figure 513. Because this building is one of the first, not the first, but one of the first, and because it's the first church in Rome, then it becomes the model for traditional Christian architecture. I have a floor plan here I think it's going to be hard for you to see, but I think you can make out the cross shape in the floor plan. See if I can help you out here. You have the shape of the cross that's kind of embedded in the floor plan. If you go to page 31 in your textbooks, page 31, you have this photograph here of a generic floor plan for a typical Christian cathedral. I'm going to walk you through it, giving you some of the architectural terms, not all of them that you see there, but some of them. We'll be making use of this vocabulary later when we look at some cathedrals out of medieval Europe. That word cathedral is kind of interesting. It comes from the Latin word for a chair or a throne. At the bottom of page 31 you see the cathedra. That's what the chair is called, the Cathedra of St. Augustine of Canterbury. It's a very old cathedra, about 1,500 years old or so. And that word cathedra means a seat or a throne, specifically the throne of a bishop. And so a cathedral is a church where a bishop presides. I'm going to show you some of the parts of the traditional Christian architecture. If I can find my cursor, I'll show you. There we go. First, the atrium, which doesn't appear on the diagram here, but the atrium is the courtyard outside the front of the church. Now, any local church can call it whatever they want to. They can call it the grass in front of the church or the front yard or whatever. I'm just giving you the technical architectural terms here. The atrium. That's the courtyard outside the front of the church, the entranceway to the church. So you cross the atrium, and you typically go through a set of double doors, and you enter kind of an odd little room called the narthex. Where's my cursor? There we go. The narthex. The narthex is here. I say it's kind of an odd little room because typically you go through a set of double doors here, and the first thing you run into is a wall with another set of double doors. But that second set of double doors symbolizes that Christianity used to be an illegal religion, that Christians had to meet behind closed doors. And so at the start of the service, traditionally they're left open until the start of the service when the doors are closed, and then opened at the end of the service to symbolize that Christianity was once an illegal religion or a criminal organization. Those doors do serve a symbolic purpose. I'll be showing you photographs of cathedrals where there isn't a wall there, but just simply a set of doors set into the floor. Well, you go through that set of double doors, and you enter a part of the building called the nave. The nave is this section of the building here. We'll go ahead and include what your diagram labels as the crossing. That's a little bit more detailed than we need to go into. The nave. Now again, any local church can call the nave whatever they want to. They can call it the auditorium or the sanctuary or whatever. But the technical term, the architectural term, is the nave. That's where most people would be seated during a typical church service. Typically you have pews, which are long benches for people to sit in. I'm not going to do this for the entire nave. Although the idea of sitting down during a church service is kind of a new idea. It's only about 600 years old or so. But that's where most people would be seated during a church service. And then you have... Did I go ahead too far? Nope. Okay. Then you have the transept. The transept are the parts that are added on to make the cross shape. Added onto the building to make the cross shape. And there you see the cross shape there. Although you hardly ever see transepts today because there's an expense to building them, and then you have to air condition and heat the air in the transepts. And well, you know when you see transepts that you're looking at a very traditional form of Christian architecture. And then you have the apse. I'm wondering how my slides got out of order. Nope. Okay. Give me a second. There. Okay. The apse. The apse is the focal point of the entire architecture. The apse up here. The apse is the location in more traditional forms of Christianity of the high altar. The high altar is in the apse. I'm trying to draw this with a mouse. If you don't know what an altar looks like, it's about the size of a good-sized desk. It's usually made out of stone. In more traditional forms of Christianity, it has to have some stone in it somewhere. It's called a high altar because typically there are 3 steps that go up to a little platform with the altar on it, and so it's up high compared to where the congregation is seated in the nave. But the apse, the focal point of the architecture, it's the location of the high altar. And then typically, whoops, my slides are all messed up. Okay, typically you have, I'm trying to spell this out with a mouse. Typically you have what's called the pulpit. There you go. Traditionally, in more traditional forms of Christianity, you have off to the side, and usually off to this side, the pulpit. That's where the minister stands to deliver the sermon. And so there I've given you, 7 terms from traditional Christian architecture. The atrium, the courtyard outside, the church, that's out here. The narthex in here, the nave through here, the transepts that make the cross shape to the church down here, up there, and down here, the apse over here, which is the location of the high altar. The high altar symbolizes the presence of God in the service, in the building, and that's why it's the focal point. In more traditional forms of Christianity, the pulpit is off to the side because what's really important is not what some person has to say about something, but the presence of God symbolized in the high altar. Well, these are 7 terms we'll be using as we go through the semester, looking at some famous cathedrals and so on. And so it'll help you to be able to understand what we're talking about if you learn these terms. And also you can expect them on the exam, so that's a side benefit as well.